When my grandfather raised his glass and smiled at me, I felt the room tilt just slightly, like a picture frame slipping off a nail. It was a small sound that did it. The clink of his fork against the rim. Clear. Gentle. The kind of sound that asks for attention without demanding it. Conversation softened around the table. Folks paused mid-air, and the hum of the restaurant seemed to lean in. I remember the way the sunlight cut through the tall windows behind him, warming the white tablecloths and turning the orange marmalade translucent. I remember thinking absurdly that I should have worn a different sweater. One without the loose thread at the cuff. To Sienna, my grandfather said, his voice steady, proud. And to the apartment she's been enjoying. May it be the first of many places she fills with beauty. The words landed wrong. Not loud, not dramatic. Wrong in the quiet way a key turns in the wrong lock. I smiled because everyone else smiled. I lifted my glass because my hand knew the choreography. But inside me, something went cold and very still. Enjoying the apartment he bought her. The room waited for my response, a warm expectation hovering over the plates of eggs Benedict and sliced fruit. My father, Richard, sat to my left, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Eyes forward, posture relaxed. Too relaxed. I opened my mouth to say thank you. The word caught. That was how it began, not with a fight or a scream, but with a pause so long it made my ears ring. Before that brunch, my life had been quiet in the way people mistake for peace. I was 31 years old and good at making myself small. I lived in a basement apartment beneath a narrow brick house on Maple Street. The kind of place you could miss, even if you were looking for it. There were no windows, only a thin strip of frosted glass near the ceiling that let in a pale suggestion of daylight. In the mornings, I woke to the sound of pipes knocking like tired knuckles. At night, I fell asleep to the low, constant breath of the dehumidifier. The air always smelled faintly of damp cardboard and bleach. I told myself it was temporary. 4 years is still temporary, if you say it softly enough. I worked part-time at a print shop downtown, trimming posters and business cards, breathing in the metallic tang of ink. On the bus ride home, I sketched in a notebook balanced on my knees lines and shapes. Rooms with windows that opened wide, chairs that caught the light just so. I had studied design once. I used to believe I'd be good at it. Life has a way of narrowing your beliefs without asking. My family knew pieces of this, but not the whole shape. They knew I was between things. They knew I was figuring it out. My father liked to say that last part with a sigh, like he was shouldering a burden no one else could see. Sienna's independent, he'd tell people. Always has been. She likes doing things her own way. What he didn't say, what he said only to me, was that I was lazy, entitled. That if I wanted more, I should work harder instead of waiting for handouts. I learned to nod, to swallow the words that rose up like bile. Arguing with my father was like pushing against a wall that enjoyed the pressure. My grandfather, Arthur, was different. He was careful with his words, as if each one cost something. He called every Sunday evening, always at 6, and asked how I was with a genuine pause afterward, the kind that left space for an honest answer. I gave him the softened version. I'm okay, I'd say. Busy. He'd hum thoughtfully and tell me about the birds visiting his feeder, or a book he was rereading because it still had something to teach him. Arthur believed in doing things right the first time. He believed in helping family quietly, without spectacle. When my mother died years ago, he was the one who showed up with groceries already labeled and frozen, dates written neatly in black marker. He never asked what I needed. He watched. The brunch was his idea. A family tradition he'd revived after a health scare the previous winter. We should sit together while we can, he'd said, smiling in that way that made arguing feel childish. So there we were, once a month, at the same sunlit restaurant with the chipped cups and the soft piano music that never quite finished a song. That morning, I'd almost canceled. The basement had flooded slightly overnight, a thin slick of water creeping toward my bed. I'd spent an hour mopping, my back aching, my hands smelling of disinfectant. But I went anyway. I wore my nicest sweater. I braided my hair and pinned it back, the way my mother used to like. Richard talked most of the meal. About his new car. About interest rates. About how young people didn't understand the value of patience. I focused on my plate. On the peppery bite of arugula. On the way my coffee cooled too quickly. Then Arthur stood, raised his glass, and said the thing that split my life cleanly into before and after. I remember the silence afterward, most of all. The way it stretched. My cousin's eyebrows lifting, my aunt's smile freezing at the corners, my father finally turning toward me, his eyes sharp now, warning. Sienna? Arthur prompted gently. Say something, sweetheart. The word apartment echoed in my head, hollow and loud. Images rushed in uninvited, the low ceiling above my bed, the damp chill that never quite left my bones, the careful way I counted coins at the laundromat. I thought of the sketches tucked into a drawer, the life I kept promising myself I'd return to. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Then, I cleared my throat. Grandpa, I don't have an apartment. The fork slipped from someone's hand. It hit the plate with a bright, unforgiving clatter. Arthur frowned, not in anger, but in confusion so pure it hurt to see. What do you mean? Richard's knee pressed hard against mine under the table. A silent command. I said slowly, feeling the room close in. I've been living in a basement for 4 years. Arthur's glass trembled. Just once. Then he set it down with great care. The sunlight kept shining. The marmalade still glowed. Somewhere, a server laughed. And in that moment, with my grandfather's eyes searching my face for a truth he couldn't yet see, I understood that the quiet I'd been living in wasn't peace at all. It was a lie that had finally run out of room. No one spoke right away. It was as if the room itself needed time to decide what to do with the truth I had set down between the plates. Arthur was the first to move. He lowered himself back into his chair slowly, both hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles pale. His eyes never left my face. Not once. There was no anger in them yet, only a careful, aching concern. The kind you see in someone who is already bracing for pain. A basement, he repeated softly. You mean temporarily? I shook my head. The motion felt heavier than it should have. No, that's where I live. My father laughed then. Not loud, not cruel on the surface. It was a short, dismissive breath of a sound, like he was brushing away dust. Dad, come on, Richard said, lifting his napkin again. You know how dramatic Sienna can be. She likes to make things sound worse than they are. I felt something tighten in my chest, not surprise. Exactly. More like recognition. This was the voice I knew. The one that made my doubts feel childish. Arthur didn't look at him. Sienna, he said instead. Tell me about it. The restaurant noises crept back in around us. Silverware scraping. Cups clinking. A baby fussing 2 tables over. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Arthur and Richard like she was watching a tennis match she hadn't meant to attend. It's under a house on Maple, I said. I kept my voice even, the way you do when you're afraid that emotion will disqualify you. There's a dehumidifier. No windows. The rent is cheap. How cheap? Arthur asked. I named the number. It sounded small out loud. Smaller than the cost of this brunch. Richard sighed, long and theatrical. See? She chose that place. I told her she should wait, save up, do things properly. But she's impatient. Arthur's head turned then. Slowly. Deliberately. You told me, he said, that you helped her with the down payment. The words hung there, heavy and unmistakable. Richard didn't answer right away. He smiled, a practiced expression I'd seen him use on clients and neighbors alike. I did, he said, indirectly. Advice, guidance. You know how kids are these days, they want everything handed to them. I felt heat rush to my face. My hands were trembling now, tucked beneath the table where I hoped no one could see. I thought of the nights I'd gone to bed hungry because I'd miscalculated the week, of the way Richard would look at my clothes, my job, my life, and shake his head like I was a puzzle with missing pieces. Arthur leaned back in his chair. He folded his hands in front of him. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but there was something steely underneath it. I wired $70,000 to you, he said. 4 years ago. For Sienna's down payment. The restaurant seemed to fade, as if someone had turned down a dimmer switch. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast. 70,000. The number pulsed in my ears. Richard's smile didn't disappear. It cracked, just slightly. Dad, that was a long time ago, he said. Money moves, situations change. Arthur nodded once. Yes, they do. He turned back to me. Sienna, he said. Did you ever receive any of that money? I swallowed. My mouth was dry. No, a simple word. Clean. Unadorned. Arthur closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. I thought, he said slowly, that I was giving you a start. A place with light. I told your father to make sure you were settled. I felt something inside me finally give way. Not collapse, but release. I thought, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts, that you didn't want to help, that maybe I wasn't worth it. Richard pushed his chair back with a scrape that turned heads. This is ridiculous, he snapped. We're doing this here? Over eggs? Arthur stood again. This time, there was no toast in his hands. We are doing this wherever the truth shows up, he said. The table had gone completely still. My aunt pressed her lips together. My cousin stared down at her plate like it held the answers. Richard, Arthur continued. You told me Sienna was thriving. You sent photos. You said she'd chosen a modest place because she didn't want to feel indebted. My stomach dropped. Photos? Richard's jaw tightened. She did choose modestly. I encouraged independence. Arthur's voice rose just enough to cut through the space. You stole from me. The word landed like a verdict. For a moment, I thought Richard might deny it outright. He had always been good at that, at shaping reality to fit his needs. But something in Arthur's expression must have told him this wasn't a conversation he could steer. I handled it, Richard said finally. I invested it. I had plans. For yourself, Arthur said. For the family, Richard corrected. It's all the same in the end. I stood then, my chair legs scraping loudly. I hadn't planned to. My body moved before my fear could stop it. It's not the same, I said. Not when you watched me struggle. Not when you called me lazy while you sat on money meant to help me live. Richard looked at me with something like surprise, as if I'd spoken out of turn. You're being ungrateful, he said. After everything I've done. Arthur turned to me, his expression softening again. Sit, sweetheart, he said. Let me handle this. Ishot. My legs felt weak. Arthur faced my father. You will show me the accounts, he said. Every transfer, every investment. If you don't, I will involve lawyers. A hush fell over the table. Thick and unavoidable. Richard scoffed. You'd do that to your own son? Arthur didn't hesitate. You did this to your own daughter. The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. The brunch ended without dessert. No one hugged. No one lingered. Outside, the air felt sharper, like I'd stepped into a different season altogether. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder before we parted. It was warm. Steady. We'll fix this, he said. Together, I nodded, though I wasn't sure what fixing even looked like anymore. All I knew was that the life I'd been enduring had been built on a lie I never agreed to live. And for the first time in years, someone had seen it clearly. In the days after that brunch, my phone rang more than it had in years. Arthur called first, then my aunt, then a cousin I barely spoke to. Her voice hushed, as if the truth we'd uncovered might still be listening. Everyone asked how I was. No one quite knew what to say. I answered politely, thanked them for their concern, and went back to the rhythm of my days, work, bus, basement, because habits don't loosen their grip just because the story has changed. But something had shifted. I could feel it in my body. I slept more lightly. I noticed sounds I'd long since learned to ignore. The drip behind the water heater. The scratch of something small moving inside the walls. Even the air felt different, like it knew it might not own me forever. Arthur insisted on coming to see where I lived. I need to understand, he said gently over the phone. Not to judge, just to see. I almost said no. Pride is a strange thing. It shows up strongest when you've had the least reason to hold on to it. But I agreed. We set a time for Saturday morning. I spent Friday night cleaning in a way that bordered on apology. I scrubbed the floor until the chemical smell stung my nose. I folded my clothes twice. I opened the little drawer where I kept my sketches and stacked them neatly, as if order could make the room feel less like a compromise. When Arthur arrived, he stood at the top of the narrow stairs and paused. Careful, I said. They're steep. He nodded and took them slowly, one hand on the railing. The basement light flickered as I turned it on. The room revealed itself the way it always did, reluctantly. Arthur didn't speak at first. He walked the length of the space, his shoes making soft sounds against the concrete. He stopped near the bed, near the dehumidifier humming dutifully in the corner. You sleep here, he said. Not a question. Yes. He reached out and touched the wall. His fingers came away slightly damp. He looked at them, then back at me. His eyes filled again, but this time there was something else there too. Anger. Focused. Controlled. I believed him, he said quietly. I trusted him. I know, I said. I did too. For a long time. We sat on the edge of the bed, knees almost touching. The space felt smaller with another person in it, like it was aware of its own inadequacy. I want you to know something, Arthur said. None of this is a reflection of your worth. Not 1 inch of it. The words hit harder than any accusation ever had. I pressed my lips together and nodded. That afternoon, we went through paperwork at his kitchen table. Arthur moved with methodical calm, pulling folders from a cabinet, laying them out in neat stacks. Bank statements, wire confirmations, emails printed and highlighted. He had kept everything. He always did. There, he said, tapping a page. That's the transfer. Dated March 4 years ago. My name was written in the memo line. Clear as day. We compared it to the documents Richard had sent me over the years, screenshots of apartment listings, vague messages about timing and market conditions. It was all smoke. All delay. Arthur hired an accountant the following week. Then a lawyer. I didn't ask him to. He simply did it. The way he did everything important without fuss. With intent. Richard called me late one night, his name lighting up my phone like a warning. "You didn't have to involve Dad like this," he said as soon as I answered. "We could have handled it privately." I sat on my bed, the hum of the dehumidifier filling the pauses. "You had 4 years," I said. "That was private enough." He exhaled sharply. "You don't understand how hard it is to manage money, to make it grow." "I understand how hard it is to live in a room with no windows," I replied. There was a beat of silence. Then, colder. "You're turning him against me." I laughed then. Just once. A small, surprised sound. "No," I said. "You did that all on your own." The investigation moved quickly. The paper trail was undeniable. Funds diverted. Investments made in Richard's name. A vacation home purchased 2 years earlier under an LLC that traced back to him. Every discovery felt like another small betrayal, stacking neatly on top of the last. Arthur confronted Richard again, this time at home, with the lawyer present. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later in careful, measured tones. How Richard had finally slumped into a chair, how his voice had lost its polish. He admitted it, not with remorse exactly, but with resignation. He agreed to repay the money, all of it, with interest. Arthur cut him out of his financial affairs that same day. "I don't take pleasure in this," Arthur told me afterward, "but I won't enable harm." The repayment began in installments. The first transfer hit my account on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. I stared at the number on my phone until the ink smell of the print shop made me dizzy. I stepped outside and sat on the curb, the sun warm on my face. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine something different, not extravagance, just air and light and a door that opened onto the world. Arthur helped me find an apartment. Not lavish, not showy, just right. Big windows, hardwood floors that caught the afternoon glow, a kitchen where you could stand at the counter and feel like a person with plans. The day I moved in, I stood alone in the empty living room and listened. No hum, no drip, just quiet. But the story didn't end there. Money fixes problems. Yes, but it also exposes them. And as Richard's lies came fully into the light, the family had to decide what to do with the truth. That reckoning came sooner than any of us expected. The next family gathering was like walking into a storm that everyone was trying not to mention. Arthur had called for a meeting at his house, something to address the elephant that had been living in all our rooms since the brunch. The house smelled of old wood and lemon polish, familiar and grounding. I arrived early. The weight of what was coming pressed tight against my chest. Richard was there, his face tighter than I'd ever seen it, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. My cousins whispered in corners, avoiding his gaze. My aunt sat rigid, her hands folded so tightly I wondered if her knuckles might crack. Arthur didn't waste time. After everyone had settled into the worn leather chairs and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air, he began. "I called you here because the truth has been spoken," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and we all need to acknowledge it." He turned his gaze toward Richard. "You have admitted to misusing funds that were meant for Sienna. That money was entrusted to you by me, with the belief it would support her future. Instead, you betrayed that trust." Richard's face went pale. "I was trying to protect the family." "That was your excuse," Arthur replied evenly. "But what you did was theft, and it hurt all of us." The room held its breath. Richard looked around, desperate. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know how else to provide. I wanted to build something, for all of us." "But you left her in the dark," I said, standing now, my voice stronger than I expected. "You lied to Grandpa. To me. You made me feel like I was the problem." The weight of those words shifted the air. For once, Richard had no defense. He looked down. "I know." There was a long silence. Then Arthur said, "We will move forward with the repayment plan. And Richard, you will not be involved in any of my affairs from this point on." Richard nodded, resigned. My aunt cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "Family is complicated," she said softly. "But we must learn from this." A cousin, younger and less guarded, spoke up. "How do we rebuild? After all this?" Arthur smiled faintly. "With honesty and with support." I felt a lightness I hadn't known I'd been missing. This wasn't a perfect ending, far from it. Richard's absence would linger. The damage wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time, the path forward was clear. Months passed. The repayment continued steadily. I furnished my new apartment slowly, carefully. Each piece of furniture, every new light fixture, was a small victory against the years I'd spent in shadow. Most importantly, I found my way back to design. Arthur's belief in me rekindled a spark I thought had burned out. I took classes online, volunteered for local projects, and finally landed a position at a respected architecture firm. At work, I wasn't just the girl who had survived. I was the woman who understood space in a way few could because I had lived without it. Then came the brunch I hosted in my own home. The sun poured through the windows. The table was set with fresh flowers, soft linens, and dishes I'd spent hours preparing. The hum of conversation filled the room, warm and genuine. Grandpa Arthur sat at the head of the table, his eyes shining with pride. My father was not there, and I didn't invite him. Peace. As we ate, I looked around at the faces I trusted. The family who had shown me support, who had chosen honesty over convenience. I realized then that I hadn't just reclaimed money or space. I had reclaimed myself, because sometimes the hardest walls to break down are the ones built inside our own homes. The weeks following my first brunch as a host were filled with small moments of quiet triumph. Every morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen counter in a way I never knew I'd missed. The smell of coffee brewing, the faint creak of my apartment settling these ordinary things, felt extraordinary after so long. I'd never thought I'd say this, but my new place felt like home. Work was a revelation. My colleagues knew bits and pieces of my story enough to understand why I was so driven, but not so much that I was defined by it. I designed with an intensity born of lived experience. Spaces had meaning for me: safety, light, air. I wanted to build places where others wouldn't feel trapped, as I had. Arthur called every Sunday still. But now, our conversations were different. We talked about projects, books, even plans to travel once the world opened again. He was proud not just of what I'd achieved, but of who I was becoming. And me? I was learning to trust again. In people. In myself. Richard's absence was a shadow that lingered at family gatherings. His name was spoken cautiously, if at all. No one expected me to forgive him quickly, or completely. But I found that forgiveness was less about him and more about freeing myself. I remember the night I finally stopped feeling angry. It was late. I was sitting by my window, the city lights flickering like stars fallen to earth. My sketchbook lay open on my lap, pages half filled with ideas for a community center. I thought about the basement apartment, the damp chill, the nights spent wondering if anyone believed in me. And then I thought about my grandfather, his quiet support, his faith even when I couldn't see it myself. I realized then that the betrayal had not defined me. It was a chapter, painful and hard, but not the whole story. Life, I understood, was about what we build after the walls come down. At my new apartment, I keep a photo on the mantle. It's of that family brunch when everything changed, the sunlight streaming, Grandpa Arthur's proud smile, my father's forced calm. It reminds me how fragile trust is, how easy it is to let it slip through your fingers. But it also reminds me that there is strength and truth in standing up for yourself, in building a new foundation when the old one cracks. To anyone listening who feels trapped in their own story, who feels small or unseen, I want you to know you are not alone. Sometimes, the hardest thing is breaking the silence. But once you do, there is light waiting on the other side. Would you have found the strength to speak your truth, even when it meant standing against those you love? Tell me in the comments. If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing for more stories that remind us all of the power of resilience, love, and forgiveness. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.